you know how much you could save on your IRS debt with the right offer and compromise? Or whether you even qualify? These are life-changing questions. And today, we're diving in deep to get the answers. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Josh Wipskowski. I've invited former IRS revenue agent Michael Sullivan today. He's a seasoned teaching instructor with the IRS, and he's a tax expert that's nationally recognized. He's spoken on Newsmax, Fox News, ABC, and many more stations. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks a lot, Josh. I appreciate you asking me to be here.
You bet. And I always working with you. As you know, you and I know we've been working together for the last 5 years and helping people resolve their tax debts. But most people aren't aware of things. One of the biggest misconceptions that I have people ask me about is this essentially tax debt forgiveness program. And people don't realize that that's really the offer and compromise. That's your wheelhouse, right? Can you walk us through how that works and what people need to know about it?
Coach, I'm not telling you anything new, but there's a lot of rumors out there about who can forgive your tax debt, why they can do fresh start tax program. It's actually dizzying. And when you're a former IRS agent like I am, there's only one program, and that actual program is the offer and compromise. That's the only way that you can possibly go ahead and forgive your tax debt is through the offer. And when you look at the internet, this one will do this one will do that. And Josh, as you know, you and I both get calls all the time, and people have been scammed left and right because they don't realize when they're calling companies. I call them big box companies. They're advertising. You see them, and they don't even know they're talking to salespeople. They have these scripts that make them look like professionals, and really, at the end of the day, they don't know what they're talking about. They have one job, and they get a commission from how much you pay that company, and they don't have a clue, as you know, Josh, about the offer and compromise. How many of you got just like that?
Just had one earlier today. And scams are the big question that keeps on coming up. They say that they can erase tax debt. I had a church call me earlier today and they said, so all that stuff I hear on the radio, that's all a scam. It's not necessarily a scam, but it's really salespeople selling a dream that they really can't deliver on, right? I mean, would you agree, Michael?
Yeah, when I was a former agent, a lot of people submit these and they're hoping they're going to settle the debt. And I think what the word on the street is IRS is going to forgive debt. Is it by a percentage? But there's this illusion. It's like this Disney World effect that, oh my God, IRS is really, and the reality is that's really not true. Last year, just think of this, only 13,000 people in the United States of all the many that have tried to get their offers approved, only 13,000 have got accepted. And it's really sad because what happens is really they've been ripped off by the person they paid good money to. They've lost their 20% deposit that they had to pay, and they got their offer and compromise, Josh, accepted, as you well know. So that's like 3 strikes and you're out, right? So, I mean, how bad is that?
So, and the way I did the math, it's somewhere between 33 and 35% actually get approved. 2/3 of them don't. But it really comes down to not just the necessary paperwork to file, but the qualifications for who gets accepted. So if you were to guide a client through this situation, Michael, what are the qualifiers that people need to have the check marks? Or is there some way that we can clarify what the qualifications of an offer and compromise are?
That's a great question. It's just how you and I practice. First, as you know, you and I do not submit an offer unless we know it's got a 99% chance of getting through because we know the criteria. So what we do is we ask for the same financial statement that IRS is going to ask for. So
that's in their pre-qualifier tool, right?
Well, yes, you do that brilliantly. You look at every single financial statement. So we know actually when we get your financial statement, literally within about 15 or 20 seconds, we'll tell you whether you qualify. There's 2 things you have to know. As you know, Josh, the IRS is looking for. They want to know what the value of your assets are. And understand this, they discount residents, as you know, 20%. But if you have $100,000 worth of assets, IRS isn't going to settle for less than $100,000. If not, it would compromise the entire tax system. And the other thing they want to do is they want to look at your income and expenses. As you know, Josh, we go over this all the time. And what most people don't realize is IRS has what's called the National Standard Expense. That means they use the Department of Labor statistics for what your food and clothing should be, what your food and clothing should be, what your housing and utility is, what your car expenses are, and what your car payments. So what no matter you put out, IRS is going to get their pen and they're going to say, oh, we're going to use it. You know what? That leaves a bunch of cash left over from IRS and that offer isn't going to go down. So they lost their 20%. They extended the statute and now they've given, as you know, Josh, an inroad into IRS as an inroad into your complete financial statement.
Yeah. And you mentioned the statute. That's one of the things I kind of want to go into. But what I see it is a lot of people think, just like TurboTax convinced them they can do their own taxes, that they can do this on their own. In your opinion, what's the biggest risk people run when they try to do this on their own?
Well, like I said, those three things. They've extended the statute of limitations. They've given IRS a 20%. And at the end of the day, IRS knows all about you. They don't have much. And when IRS rejects the offer, they know where to collect the money from. So you've lost on three. On three. It's really sad. And it's all, Josh, as you know, because of false advertising. Everyone believes what? They can settle their what? They can settle their tax debt, right?
Yep. Yep. Because of the ads that are out there. And the collection statute is just the period of time that, if I'm correct, that the IRS has to collect that tax debt from the due date of the return to the date the return is filed out 10 years. And once that's expired, it's expired. But if you file an you extend that statute. Is that correct, Michael? If you file an offer?
The statute for the time it was in offer status. And what's really sad is many of these people file really late. So if they would have waited another year or two, the statute would have naturally expired and they wouldn't even owe the IRS debt. So that is really, really sad. That's why what a professional does is they find out when your statute is, they see when it's going to expire, they see whether you even need to file the offer, they look at your financial statement, and they make sure your offer has a chance. Because the things that you need to know about Josh and I, we don't really even charge for looking at your financial statement because I don't even want your case, neither does Josh, unless we know your offer's got a chance to go through, right, Josh? We don't.
Yeah. Well, we pride ourselves on doing the right thing. And if it's not going to work for somebody, I don't want to charge somebody money and risk my reputation being damaged because somebody's plan didn't work out and we told them we would help them. People are getting these CP 504 notices or when they're a business, payroll tax, the CP 504B. And those are really serious notices, right?
Yeah, the CP5, here's what happens. People don't understand this, but their IRS case is in a computer. There's not a person monitoring that case. So what IRS does is they send an LT14. That means, hey, you owe tax, did you know? Then they send a CP501, which is next, which they say, hey, this is another reminder. Then they send you a 503, says, hey, it's all stepped up language. Then the CP4 comes out, and then they say, hey, if you don't contact us, we're going to take your wages. We can contact your neighbors. We can contact your bank. We can go ahead and send a wage garnishment out. And guess what? We can file a federal tax lien. Then 30 days, they send that certified because they know they need to wake the taxpayer up. And then, as you know, Josh, when that last letter, the LT 11 comes out and the 1058, 30 days after that, it's the lights out. It's IRS is doing a full court press. They're doing a blitz, and the computer system just goes nuts, sending out. And all they want the person to do is call IRS and close their case, right?
It's a way of them getting your attention. The state of Minnesota, where I live, does things the same way. They start garnishing your wages and then a little more, and they got your attention. Then you give them a call. They're happy. What I've seen recently is that the CP 501 is being jumped over and they're jumping into the 503 or immediately getting the 504 because there was a period of time there that the IRS wasn't sending out notices, and now they've got new hires and new employees that are taking care of things. What's unique about the way that we handle cases together, Michael? Our team really focuses on navigating these complex situations for taxpayers. And I think it's one of the reasons why people really trust us, your expertise and my years of working in tax.
Well, I think it's more than that. I think we don't want the people coming back to us. And many times people call us and their financial life is out of order to start with. They have credit card debt, they have income problems, they have expense problems. And I think what we do is we really take a holistic approach to this. We ask the person, hey, you're not even making estimates or you're not making withholding. And we talk about this all the time, Josh. The very first thing you need to do before you start working with IRS is do two things. And as a former agent, when I've knocked on doors, and I've knocked on many, maybe, God, thousands, these are the two things. Are all your tax returns filed? And are you now, and this year that Minna and I talk, is your withholding up to date, or are you making withholding? And is your W-2s up to date? If you're not, you're basically telling IRS, well, I don't care to pay my taxes. I don't want to file them. So the first thing we do is we care about you and we want to stop the problem first. And after we stop the problem, right, we work on the back problem and deal with the debt. And in doing that, I want you all to know, and gee, Josh and I go over this with everyone over and over. IRS is going to close your case in one of three ways. When they look at your financial statement, they're either going to put you in a currently non-collectible, which pretty much means at the current time, you're currently non-collectible. Your case will come out for review in 3 or 4 years when the computer sees fit, when IRS has more employees to work the case. 2, they're going to put you in a payment agreement because your financial statement deems that. But a lot of times, Josh and I can kind of polish that up, so that may not be the case. And lastly, they will look at the offer to settle the debts. We have this holistic approach where we do this. Then we talk to you about your finances. Are you out of balance? Do you have credit card debt? We really, right, Josh, try to put
Yep.
the person back where they're good stewards over their money. I think that's a good word for it.
Yeah. And speaking of good stewards, the one thing that I think is unique about both you and I, whether people go to your website or my website first, we both offer free consultations, which I think is a huge value. What can people expect if they go to our website and they ask us, hey, can you sit down with me and talk? What can people expect in that meeting?
Well, I want to contact you and I call Josh first. He sends out about a $10,000 cash bonus for your birthday. I don't do that. I only send out about 3,000. Josh up in Minnesota, he's very rich from cutting down all those trees up there, but Josh will send you at least $10,000 out. I'm just a little cheaper. I don't do that, but like I said, we value you as a person. We want to build up a relationship with you. We want to find out really about your family life. Where are you spending your money? The thing that always bothers me is when people are running up debt. And generally, if this is a married filing joint tax return, we like to speak to the husband and the wife so everybody's on the same page. It doesn't help to speak to the wife and the husband if you're not together on this. It's just going to perpetuate, Josh, as you know, problems over and over again. So we are trying to resolve your whole financial life, just not
Stop the bleeding first, right?
Stop the bleeding. That's a good word for that, Josh. Stop the bleeding. Absolutely. If you don't stop the bleed, and a lot of people, it's really, as you know, I've been doing this so long, they actually feel relieved when they say, hey, we got to turn this over because you no longer have to speak to IRS. We get the notices, we keep up with that, and basically what we do is try to relieve the pain you're going through. I know this causes a lot of stress. I had 2 taxpayers in my inventory back in the day that actually both killed themselves because of their IRS debt. One actually chained themselves to the federal courthouse up in West Palm Beach at Clementa Street, 701 Clementa, handcuffed him, and he kept his IRS notices, and he threw them about 10 feet. And then, he handcuffed himself and lit himself on fire. And someone else took a gun to them. And, people, I don't think we realize as practitioners how much stress that people go through. So I think both of us are really sensitive to this, right? So I think one of the things we try to do is try to meet you at your point of need, meet you at your stress point and say, hey, let's do this to make your life a little easier. What do you think about it? Would you say that, Josh, is
Yeah,
true?
yeah. And I think that the key is when people want to get in touch with us, they're going to find, a kind and compassionate voice. I think a lot of the times when you're sharing with people, you prefix your statement that's going to come across as harsh if you don't start out by saying, lovingly, the IRS doesn't care. Lovingly, they're not going to listen to your story.
They call me on my cell phone. My cell phone is always really available. That's what I do, and I know you take all the calls. We care. You can say, "Oh, that's nice. That's a bunch of baloney," but I will tell you that's not the case. That is not the case. We care about. By the way, when you call us, we give you an answer to your problem, whether you retain us. I may say do this. Josh may say do that. We at least give you, and we can't take many cases, to be honest, because they're not, you may not be eligible and we can't do anything for you. So in that case, we tell you what you can do on your own. So we are really good. I would say if 10 people call us, Josh, realistically, we can work 3 cases and we tell the other 7, hey, here's a good idea for you to move forward.
Exactly. And Michael, as always, your insights are invaluable and it's always a pleasure working with you. You've mentioned your cell phone and stuff like that. If someone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to contact you?
They should pretty much call me at 954-328-3501, or you can call it Josh. Josh is good enough, and we're partners really at the end of the day. I don't care really who you call. It
Yeah.
really,
If you want to call Best Tax Pro, 763-477-4205. And you got to know, I'm going to be calling Michael and we're going to be talking with you together.
what does that stuff mean over by your name? I know it looks like alphabet soup. Could you tell everyone what
Go
that's?
back here, the gold frame. Yeah, the gold frame, United States Tax Court practitioner. So I got sworn into the U.S. Tax Court as if I were a U.S. Tax Court attorney, but I'm not an attorney. There is only one other person in the state of Minnesota, and she's not a tax preparer. She's actually a professor at Metro State University. So the skills that I bring to the table complement what Michael has, and what Michael has definitely complements my business. I can specialize in helping people that have a tax problem that you need to take the IRS to court. They're not seeming to listen to reason, or the case gets pushed around here and there, and then all of a sudden you get a notice of deficiency, and that's one of the doorways to get into U.S. tax court. So it's just a unique designation, United States Tax Court practitioner. I've gotten a couple of YouTube shorts out there that explains what it is and the benefits that we provide in addition to being an enrolled agent.
When you do shorts, or is it just the term shorts?
No. So Michael lives in the beach land of Florida, and I live where it snows in Minnesota. And I've lived in Florida for 3.5 years. I've lived in Taiwan. I've lived in the tropics. I understand it, but Michael and I have this difference of opinion about snow.
Josh, there's one thing I want to talk about that we didn't cover, and I want to talk about the issue of unfiled returns. When I started my practice, and Josh will tell you as we do this together, it's really amazing because I thought all I'd be doing was resolving IRS debt and submitting offers and compromise. Half of our cases are unfiled returns. It's unbelievable. I have some people that never filed. Josh will tell you some with 20 years, 10 years.
It gets to the point where, okay, and I'm going to throw this right back at you, Michael, but there's a way that the IRS put a program together that you don't have to file all those years. When you get to that point, and Michael, when you have somebody you're speaking to, and they owe past tax debt, and they haven't filed all their current past years, you throw them my way. But you let them know about something that the IRS allows. Can you tell us a little more about what the IRS requires in order to get you current?
That was a great setup. Thank you. We both tell them, just not me. IRS has a policy statement. By the way, you can look up all IRS policy statement. They're not the laws, but they're policies. They go by these policies. It's P5-133. What that says, you only have to file the last 6 years. You're going to say, you mean it's fact if I haven't filed in 10 or 12 or 15 or never, I only have to file the last 6? Yes, you only have to file the last 6 years tax returns. That's it. So what's really cool is whether you have records or we don't have records, we can reconstruct your tax returns. And you're going to say, how can I reconstruct the tax returns? Well, so you know, IRS has on irs.gov, you can pull your own W-2s or 1099s, and that's where we start. Or let's say you lost all your expenses. You say, well, how can you possibly prepare my return? Josh can tell you there's a couple of sites, aren't there, Josh, where you can reconstruct or an IRS approves these. Could you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, so there's a portion in the Internal Revenue Manual. That's not the code. The code is the law. Internal Revenue Code is the law. Internal Revenue Manual is their Bible of sorts. Their way of operating and the procedures that they follow. And in the manual, there's, I'm going to say, 9 different ways of reconstructing expenses. One of the ones a lot of people, CPAs and enrolled agents, are very familiar with is the Cohan rule. We don't use that method. That method uses other alternative sources to support your numbers. We use a method in the Internal Revenue Manual that's hidden deep that talks about reconstructing your expenses. And we use an IRS approved method, the same way the IRS would reconstruct your expenses if they cared to reconstruct your expenses. They really care about reconstructing your income, but your expenses, they don't have to give that to you.
Where do you get that from?
Well, I get it from the Internal Revenue Manual in the Collections Section 5. And I don't have it memorized because I know where to find it and I know how to apply it. I go out and I use the same source that the IRS would use to confirm that your expenses are in line with industry standards for the industry you're in, for the region in the United States that you're in.
And let me tell you how all this works. As a matter of fact, let's just switch gears and let's go ahead. Anyway, thank you for that, Josh. We have statistics that IRS approves, and half the people who are self-employed don't have their records. Just know we have IRS approved methods to go ahead and
It's reasonable to understand that you don't have records from 2019. And it's reasonable that if you don't have that, that we would have to reconstruct. Now, if you have bank statements and we can prove income, that doesn't really mean you have expense records, because you need to have the proof of purchase, which is a receipt, proof of payment, which might be your bank or credit card statement, and a proof of business purpose. But with reconstructing, we accomplish all 3 without having to produce anything other than a record of income. And it would be unruly if they made you do that.
We've never had a return audited ever from doing this.
Nothing that I submit.
Which brings me up to another subject. I know there's will be a cut in a break here. Many people ask, why is my tax return audited? People, as you know, Josh, they ask us all the time, no matter what seminar in or where we're teaching. People say, Michael and Josh, how do we get audited? Let me just tell you, most of the time, 90% of the time, it's through the DIF process. You may say, what's the DIF process? It's a discriminatory index function score. You're going to say, gee, that's a fancy name, but what does that mean? Well, it simply means that IRS looks at all the returns in the United States. IRS looks at all the returns regionally and in a district. And what they do, if they have statistics, so if you make, say, $100,000, they know what every line item worth of deduction should be, how many credits, how many losses, how many gains. They put all this information together, and they have one giant algorithm that scans. With AI, as Josh knows, they just scan your return. And IRS has got so good and so sophisticated, they can tell if your tax return falls out of the national average. Then what happens is this. They know that every office in the United States can handle so many audits. So what they do is they then take these returns, send them down to the local office to eyeball them. Then those returns go back up to the service center, and then they know how many audits every local branch can have. So they take those which have the lowest hanging fruit, and they can't send more than they need. They may know that in a given year you could handle 1,600 hours of IRS audits. They calculate that and send those returns back to the audit. Then that information from there is all dumped back into the IRS computer, and what they do is they keep refining and refining and refining their statistics. But just so you're audited doesn't mean you owe money. It just shows that something's off with the computer calculation.
And Michael, you and I got started in this business on opposite sides of the table. You at the IRS as a revenue agent. I'm going to ask you to share a little bit about that. I started by doing the enrolled agent program with the IRS, licensed by the Department of Treasury. And then I started doing audits for 7 years, about an audit a week for 7 years before Minnesota Revenue, and primarily from the IRS. And I encountered tax compliance officers, which are at a second level, and then revenue agents. And that's where you got your start. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Michael, revenue agent?
Got my start really as a revenue officer. And by
We
the
did.
way, I just want to show you this is what Josh sent to me. I want you to know this is the spinning. I keep this bobblehead here every day, so I think of Josh. Every time I can't think of something, I shake my head and it comes up with an answer. But yeah, I started my time actually, just so you know, I was hired as an auditor and I was just out of college, 20 years old. I got out a little early. I didn't know, I wanted to go into law school, but I said, I really don't want to study anymore. I just hate studying. I just did. I'm more of an audio or learner. I'm a big audio or learner. They sent me down to IRS Miami. Great pay, great pay. And they showed me around the office and they said, this is where you're going to work. And I said, 8 hours, 8.5 hours a day. I said, well, how long is my lunch? And they said, well, your lunch is like a half hour. I said, well, where do you have lunch? I didn't see a lunchroom. He's just as a kid. And they said, well, it's about 10 minutes away down to floor 4. I was on floor 28. I says, does this cut into my lunchtime? Well, food's important to me, right? I says, yeah. So I says, you mean to tell me if I go down and come up, that's 20 minutes and I only get 10 minutes to eat? They says, oh, but don't worry, you get 2 10-minute coffee breaks. I says, well, how far away is the coffee break? They says, oh, we have a little office 2 floors down. I said, well, how long does it get there? So anyway, and I says, do I get to leave or am I in this cubicle all day? He said, oh, no, that's where you're at. So I literally got up. I says, thank you very much. I says, if I had this job, they would arrest you because I'd be flying out this door. I couldn't stand working here. So I went home, went back to Fort Lauderdale. By the time I got home, remember, there were no cell phones. I get a rotary call. Hey, Michael, we'd like you back in the Fort Lauderdale office, not the Miami office. So that day, I started at IRS that very day. So I'm in my initial interview, and the person says, hey, could you go ahead and seize vehicles if people owed the tax? I'm thinking, what a bunch of crap this is. Seize vehicles? This is really a joke. So I'm thinking, he says, well, could you? This is an important answer. I'm thinking to myself, I need this job. I'll seize anything I want to get this job. So the person says, okay, I went through all, you're hired. Well, hour later, I was going on a seizure and I went out and I seized a pink Cadillac belonging to a Mary Kay dealer. And that's how I got my start. I made about 320 seizures. I worked a narcotic trafficking program at IRS. I used to go into the homes of drug dealers. And I will tell you a quick story because you're going to want to share this. So on my first day when I seized that pink Cadillac, I went out with a guy named Bob Henley. I don't know if Bob's living anymore, but we went ahead and delivered to Sarah Very. She's about 80. Cadillacs were only given to Mary Kay distributors who sold like a ton of money. Back then, 200,000 was like $1 million. She must have been like a superstar. So we needed to call the wrecker, but there were no cell phones. There were only pay phones. So Bob says, hey, do you have any change? He says, I need a nickel and a dime to make a call to call the wrecker. So I give him the money. He goes to call the wrecker, goes about 5 miles away. He had to find a pay phone. In the meantime, Sarah Verity, this little old lady, she's got to be dead by now. I don't know if she went to heaven or hell, probably hell. I have no idea. But anyway, she says, hey, Mr. Sullivan, I know you seized my car, but if you take it, I have my sweater in there. She says, do you mind if I get the sweater? I says, no, ain't no problem to me. I don't really care. So Sarah goes out to her car. She has this little cane. She's going out there, and I'm just paying attention. She had a nice orchids and bromeliads in the yard. I'm looking at them. The next thing, I'm pausing, and the car starts. Oh, this is not going to be good. The car starts. I had one job, Josh. I had to keep my eye on that car because it was now government property. So she backs the car up and goes into the road. I says, my God, I am going to lose my job. And I didn't even have my first coffee break by then. I didn't have my coffee break. This is how I'm thinking it there. I need a coffee break, donuts. Hey, what's going on here? Next thing I know, she puts that car in drive and she does not head down the street. You know where she's heading at, Josh? She's pointing that car at me and she drives this car right at me and stops short. And she yells at the car, you son of a bitch, I'm going to kill you. So this time she backs up. And just by that time, the neighbors heard all this and the police come. So the police come ahead and they come up to me, and Sarah's yelling that he's robbing me. He tried to take his car. He's robbing me. So the police come up to me and they say, who are you? I says, well, my name is Mike Sullivan. I'm an IRS agent. And he said, well, do you have any ID? Well, this is my first day at the job. I don't have jack. I have nothing. I didn't have my. So they go ahead and they put me in the back of the cruiser. They put me in the back of the cruiser. And this son of a bitch lady is laughing at me. They're going to take me away. And then just Bob Henley finally comes around with the wrecker, and they're there to seize the car. He shows her the seizure papers, shows her the commission. I'm out of the car. She's in the car. She's handcuffed. She's driving away. I shot her a bird and she shot me a bird. That was my first day. Then I went back to the IRS office to have a cup of coffee. That's my first day at work. By noon, I was arrested and she was back in the car. I headed back to the office, and that's the best first day I've ever heard. Correct?
Michael, always a pleasure to hear your stories, your saga of your time at the IRS.
Bye.
Wish you the best. Thank you very much for sharing what you could.
I'll hang this up. Please hang me up. If not, you're going to see me naked. So what are you going to do?
All right. Take care, Michael. Thank you.